Right there, very good. Rob is going to present.
Okay, hi, I'm Rob. I don't necessarily know everyone's name. Nice to meet you. That's not your names. Austin is crawling in the door. I have a paper I'm writing based on research I'm doing on the history of the drum set. Maybe just read to you a little bit of it, and then we'll listen to some stuff, maybe see if there's any connection at all. I'm at the Oddmusic Unconference. I heard a few people use the phrase the Microtonal Unconference. I don't know how to present the microtonality of this instrument. However, there might be a lot you could say if you want to invent a vocabulary of microtimbral differences. And also there is quite a range of sounds very close to one another. Micro close to one another. It's simple.
Rob, in class, I presented the idea at some point that if microtonal could be referring to kind of deep world of distinctions within pitch, and so given that, then microtimbral seems like a cousin, a close cousin.
Nice. I have a quote from Theodore Adorno, and maybe 2 paragraphs of stuff, so I'm not going to read from the laptop. I can do that much. From his piece on, do people know this piece? Probably at the school especially should know Adorno. It's the decay of listening, fetishism, music fetishism and the decay of listening, is that what it's called? It's from 1938. Anyway, it's important. Today, the material as such, destitute of any function, is celebrated. One need not even talk about the capacity for musical performance. Even mechanical control of an instrument is not really expected. All this reaches a climax of absurdity in the cult of master violins. One promptly goes into raptures at the well-announced sound of a Stradivarius, or an Amati, which only the ear of a specialist can really tell apart from a good modern violin, forgetting in the process to listen to the composition and the execution, from which there's still something to be had. The more the modern technique of the violin bow progresses, the more it seems that the old instruments are treasured. If the moments of sensual pleasure in the idea, the voice, the instrument, are made into fetishes and torn away from any functions which could give them meaning. Alright, and then, so that's kind of just an island of thought. 2, this is now me. Abstract. The American drum set as a site of cultural appropriation. Well, that's the title, actually. Title. The American drum set as a site of cultural appropriation. Right? Abstract. The American drum set reflects the cultural imperialism of music/entertainment industries in the era of recorded sound. Introduction. It's a very short abstract, just one sentence. It's not finished, so this is work in progress. Introduction. This essay describes the development of the drum set as a commodity and as a means of cultural production. Let's skip the rest of the introduction. There's an interesting paragraph down here. Alright, so, in this paper, what yet to be written, I will argue that the percussion equipment imported to the United States, assimilated into the American drum set, and its subsequent export of beat-driven music from the U.S. echoes the trade dynamics of the mercantile system developed in the early colonial era. A lot of academic sound stuff, but this is really great. First, the colonial, this is mercantilism, so probably a lot of people know this. First, the colonizer derives the raw materials, let's say cotton, iron, and sugar, from the colonies, from the satellite area, brings it back to the industrial center, that's the colonial center, and manufactures it into products like textiles, steel, rum, and then a portion of that is actually sold back to the colony for a profit. That's a system called mercantilism. It's a little before the sort of free market economics of capitalism. It's capitalist, but not developed capitalism per se. Marx eventually came along and clarified a lot of this stuff. It's amazing that for some reason the Europeans actually argued against doing this. Anyway, the industrialized nations had the factories, The colonies had the raw materials and supplied markets for the finished goods. The injustice of this arrangement today seems obvious, given that protectionist tariffs on trade would erode the development of the free market. And we think of it, free trade and all that, blah, blah. So what I want to theorize in this paper, and I'm going to stop now, is why this kind of dynamic seems to have repeated itself in the cultural construction of the modern drum set in the 20th century, which is the free market era, post-colonial era, whatever you want to call it. All right, so why don't I just kind of describe some of this stuff we're looking at here, and talk about why we don't look at them like this anymore. This isn't contemporary drum equipment, if you can't tell. Just about everything up here is at least 50 years old, and we could listen to it a little bit, but you know, that's so you kind of hear that's where my interest is. I guess I could say as a kind of footnote too. There's only one book I know of that's really just straight up gives you a big history of cymbals. My interest is mainly in the cymbals. This is the cymbal book. It's the cymbal book. It's someday maybe it will be a cymbal book. But it's not apolitical, but it's not. I mean, it's obviously just a bunch of guys who like their instrument. I think Urbana was talking about, and I'm really sort of skeptical of myself in doing this. I guess that's why I bring all that in right away. Is like, am I just kind of like fetishizing these like objects that I'm collecting? All right. So there's two places that cymbals come from: China and Turkey. This is history, not today, but long time ago. So Chinese cymbals, you can probably guess, have a different shape than the cymbals that come from Turkey and now Europe. The bell is shaped differently, so this part's called the bell. The thing that's nice about cymbals from Asia is, a lot of parts of Asia, not only China, is that the bell can be held with your hand. So you can put a hole through it and stick it on one of these stands, but you can also use it as a handle, right, and play it like that. And there's all kinds of range of sounds you can play. And you can play with different things, you get different sounds from it. A lot of gong-like sounds come out of Chinese and other Asian societies that produce cymbals, most of which got the idea from each other.
You're calling Turkey Asia as well, huh?
Well, yeah, Asia Minor is...
But when you're saying Asia, you're referring to both origins of the
Yeah, well, so no one really knows how the heck those two interacted. So, all right, part of what this paper will do is demonstrate that it's almost impossible to decode in English. Looking at the English literature, there's so much racism in the description of the history of drums that it's really hard to decode how the heck Turkey and China might have interacted. My sense is that people were just making shit up and publishing it. So they'll say, Alexander the Great brought China cymbal technology from Tibet, and then brought it all the way back through Turkey on its way back. So there's just all kinds of made up stuff. They almost always deny that the Chinese came up with cymbal technology on their own, the ability to make bronze. The story from Turkey is slightly different. There's a family of Armenians called the Zildjian family, which is roughly an Armenian word for a cymbal maker. Zildjian. So back in the 1600s, an old Zildjian dude was what is the word where you mix the metals together? Alchemist. An alchemist. So he was trying to figure out how to make gold from tin or something like that. And at least that's how the family story goes, is stumbled upon the fact that a particular proportion of tin, copper, and some trace elements produces very musical sounding bronze that's much more dynamic in what you can do with it than other types of bronze. I can talk a little bit more about that. But Zildjian cymbals sound really different. It's definitely not the type of sound you get from Chinese cymbals, which have a lot more, well, here's where we get into vocabulary, how you want to describe the sounds.
Splash.
Splash, or in English, in the West or whatever, we a lot of times refer to this as a trashy sound. I think that comes from Great Britain. They used to call cymbals clash pans, which referred to the lids that would be on trash cans. And so now, I mean, and it's a little bit, I just continue to skepticize to this day. So you see these cymbals that say, literally will say on them, Oriental, trash. and this is what it is, and so like that's the vocabulary that's come with it. But obviously a fairly different kind of musical resource than that. So that's a little bit about just like kind of the two main centers of where cymbals come from. So the Zildjian family was involved in the resistance against the Turks in the Turco-Armenian War in the 1920 era. So you guys know this, but like Armenia was this place. It got divided in half. Turkey incorporated half of it into Turkey. The other half became a Soviet republic by the end of 1920. The Zildjian family was exiled to Budapest, possibly Albania, and there's like this cloud of confusion about what happened then. Somehow, by 1929, one of the Zildjians ended up in Boston. So, like, all right, now we're getting to the U.S. era of things. So here's a Zildjian cymbal that was probably produced in 1929, 30, or 31 in the United States. And this is what we call a splash cymbal. It's also like very quick decay. So if you want to talk about the timbral word, as opposed to, how long does that decay in it? It's almost silent. You can talk over it after a second too. So splash cymbals, or sometimes they would be called choke cymbals, are part of the early part of the American drum set. And so you'd be playing, if you were dancing around with brushes on their snare drum back there, that would be the kind of effect that you would go for, was this choke. We call it a choke cymbal. The only other cymbal that was really packaged with a set of drums in the 1920s would be Chinese cymbals about this size, about 12 inches. This one, some light rain on this, so it's all green. The copper rusts. But so this was actually the original ride cymbal. Everyone has the vocabulary of this, so maybe I just do it. A ride cymbal, the function of riding is, when you use a drum set today, is like keeping the pulse. So that's the function of ride.
It creates this whole like sheen on the top of the music because it's constantly going.
Yeah, so this is where it would be good to get into the discussion about what sound characteristics were selected for. I asked a few friends, none of them who took me up on it today, to bring some modern cymbals so we could compare these two. So one of the things that's different today is cymbals are usually much higher in pitch. The fundamental one is very low. But let's not get into that too much. So writing, there's boring drum.
Can you please play with the meter that you have now on the trashy cymbal?
Sure. I need to just hop off a few here. But that idea of writing predates what now is considered a ride cymbal. That's the main thing I'm trying to establish, and you're actually helping me because it sounds really different if you do it on a 12-inch Chinese imported cymbal from that era. Playing really boring stuff, but I mean, we're just doing this demo of the sound. Or even if you were just kind of going. Much more bell-like. Today, actually, when people play a Chinese cymbal, yeah. And when people play them today, they actually use it as more like a crash function. So you're playing. There's a kind of crash on it. So a crash is a separate function from a ride. The ride is played through that whole song, and a crash is like a one-time accent, or sometimes multiple times. Rock music, you're going to hear someone sitting there playing like. So that's crashing all over the place. But the distinction is initially one of how you play, and then it becomes a distinction of what the instrument is. So that's kind of an interesting. So crash has to do with the opening up of the cymbal. So these cymbals are light because they're old, so they open up rather easily. They don't have to Like I had to hit it extremely lightly to get it to stay as quiet as it is, where I can actually ride on that. But hardly hitting it at all, it's going to really, the whole thing will vibrate, as opposed to mainly the bridge. Crash! It's weird, I've never had someone introduce me to this way, so now I'm doing it to you. It's weird. But so the original time, so it was the Ludwig Drum Company. The Ludwig family was a Chicago family, military trained, and in the early period of the drum set, in America, okay, there's probably a parallel and interesting history in Europe, I don't know anything about it. In America, the pressure was, you have big bands after the Civil War era. Okay, now they, for some reason, are wanting to have more gigs in the cities in order to make some money. You can't have one person playing a bass drum, one guy sitting there with a snare drum, another person with two cymbals, and that's the whole roll, because there's not enough room on the stage, damn it, the performance hall is too small. And frankly, we don't have enough money to pay for percussionists for something that we could probably figure out how to put in front of one person. So that's the kind of vector of influence by which there was a pressure to figure out how could one person do what many people were doing. This Ludwig family, they were in Chicago. They happened to be at the World's Fair, which is when Zildjian cymbals from Turkey were first brought to the U.S. for the celebration of Columbus's wonderful, benevolent conquering of everyone. So 1892 and 93 is the World's Fair. And it's like, this kind of moment of multiculturalism, albeit under the auspices of a complete celebration of colonialism, in Chicago. William Ludwig is something like 15 years old. He gets his first drumming gig there. And Karov, the guy who, the letter K in K Zildjian cymbals, actually comes from Constantinople at the time to present his cymbals in the United States and try to find a new market for his cymbals. That's the guy that comes up with the drum pedal for the bass drum. So you can't see it, but you know what this looks like. So I can play with my foot. 1909 he gets the patent for that thing, and basically that makes that company rich for about 10 years. Then everyone else figures out, okay, we can work around the patent and make our own things. The company goes bankrupt. But at the time, the Ludwig family in Chicago has an opportunity to really frame what a drum set is. And what they did was they took Chinese tom-toms, that's what these are. This military snare was shortened, really mostly in the 20s, but even in the 1910s, you start seeing shorter snare drums and metal snare drums, which is probably an influence from Europe, though that's part I'm less clear on. That can be tuned on both heads. Before that, it would have just been one hook on one side and a tuning thing on the bottom. They tune sympathetically. And then packaging them with a Chinese cymbal. Or, if you wanted to spend a few extra bucks, a Turkish import. They weren't even branded back then. So there's this era in the early 1900s where there wasn't any stamp on them. And they're the hardest ones to come by, because there's no one, do I throw this out or not? There's nothing written on it. All these have enough written on them that I can tell you what year they were made, just over a decade. So let's see, where are we? So then we're in the 1920s, company goes bankrupt. Oh, World War I and World War II, fuck up everything. So, basically trade with China probably stopped somewhere in the early 1930s. This is another part, I'm unclear on it, and no one has bothered to try to figure out what's going on with these Chinese symbols. They're handmade. Every single one of these probably takes weeks on end to make. I could describe a few basic things about the differences further in that direction, and then maybe we just listen to a bunch of them. So, the big difference, bronze. Bronze is tin and copper. Cymbal bronze is 80% copper, 20% tin. It's called B20. Bronze is 20% tin. But tin is brittle, copper is bendable. The thing that's confusing is how did people manage to get such a high proportion of tin into these cymbals without having them shatter when you hit them? So you get that crack, that crash sound, but you don't get a crack in your cymbal. And that's the thing that's rare, and that I'm referring to when I say in Turkey they figured it out, and in China they figured it out. In other places they've got bells and they've got bronze, but usually it's so thick, and that's how they avoid the cracking. This thing of making a very thin thing, which gives you a lot of other colors, is the rare thing. And we think today it's probably a little bit of silver. That's probably true. It's literally, the Zildjian family still continues to mix the alloy in a room that only 2 people are allowed into. So they're like that. And there's a lot of other companies that make these things. You can basically just buy the discs of bronze out there, flattened things. The main difference, though, between the Chinese method of making cymbals and the Turkish method, which is what we could just say the European, American, Western method now, is that the Chinese make the bronze into a blob and then sit there with a sledgehammer and beat it flat. And there's a picture of it in here, actually. Do you mind if I, it's pretty interesting, because there it is. It's hugely labor intensive. You see, here you have this giant sledgehammer. Actually, it looks like he's hitting something that's pretty well made. But you can see, you pass it around or something, but these are, it always looks like some kind of terrible dungeon where they make these cymbals. So like, they've got like whatever the thing is called, a crucible, and like some poor workers have to sit there like slaving over bronze on it. The method that comes out of Turkey is more like they kind of make it into a mold. In the old days, they didn't set the bell right away, but now they actually punch the bell with this aspect into it right away. But in the old days, it would just be a cylinder, a disc of bronze, and then someone goes over to an anvil and starts hitting it with a hammer. And what they're doing is they're making it more even on all sides. They're actually affecting the thickness. If you look at this cymbal, because this one is old, you might even be able to tell from the profile that there are parts where it's a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner. When I put it on the stand, if I play it a lot, it'll always end towards the same position if it's tilted, because it's a little heavier right over here. So each one is kind of one of a kind, and thus it attracts the thing that Adorno's describing with the Stradivarius. The K Zildjian cymbal from Istanbul or Constantinople is like there's only a few of them out there. If you can get one, congrats, they're rare, and you can promptly see people say, oh, I can tell it's better than any cymbal that's made today. Probably not true. I bet they can figure out how the hell this happened with the science that we've got today. In fact, there are quite a few facsimiles out there that are wonderful. There is a sound or two that are really hard to get. And I could get you to. Can I just stick this into here for a second?
Yeah.
The sound?
Yeah.
So there's this sound, it's sometimes referred to as smoke. It's highly sought after. If you can get an old K that's got the smoke sound, it's like, you're a lucky person, because this is one sound that I know that it is just about impossible to replicate. I don't know how it's going to sound through this. This is a sound file. So someone recorded a cymbal. This is from around 1955 when the cymbal was produced. It's a 17-inch cymbal, another thing they never would make today. See if you can hear it. It's that little hissing. Have you ever heard someone say that a cymbal sizzles or something like that? Or even sometimes you'll see things have been installed in a cymbal like this in order to make it sizzle a little bit, so that when you hit it, they rattle. So something about these cymbals from this one period in the mid-50s, they seem to make that sound naturally. That little bit of, like there's a second piece of metal there.
It sounds like 2 cymbals.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, and so the only explanation that I found comes from a metallurgist who was slicing up these old cymbals, probably, jumping off a cliff or something to see the cymbals get broken, but his claim is that the way that they tempered the metal resulted in a soft area of bronze sandwiched by 2 hard layers of bronze. So it's as though the shell of the cymbal was hard and brittle, but then the inside was soft. So that's how you could hit it and it wouldn't smash, but you did get that sound. That it was almost like 2 pieces of hard metal were clapping against each other, right in one unitary object. So these are things that might be lost. I mean, the reason those things are all there in the past is because there was no science per se of it. The people that were making these symbols were probably functionally illiterate, and they say maybe they made about 8 to 20 symbols a week for something like 30 years on end. And so those are all out there somewhere.
Per person or per shop?
Per factory, the whole cave.
And there would be like 20 people there.
Yeah, I mean, like the way it's described, there's literally interviews with the guy that used to run the factory saying, well, we get an order for symbols, and we go call some of our friends and order some bronze, and, order some copper and tin, and make an order, and then ship it out. And then if there wasn't any work tomorrow, it would be lock the door, and that's it. The people from that company populated all the other symbol-making companies we have today. In Italy, Switzerland, Pasty, or however you say that company up there, and also in the United States, the Sabian company, you see a lot of Sabian symbols, comes from Robert Siljan, who was one of the two sons of Vita Siljan, who had a huge fight in 1979, 1980, and bought the copyright to K. Siljan and shut down the factory in Turkey, and brought the whole infrastructure to the US, first to Medutic in Canada, then to Quincy, Massachusetts. There are no longer Siljan symbols made in Turkey. And so that's where this mercantilist thing is really present. I could do a separate story as such for the Chinese toms. But the entire concept has really been appropriated by capital corporations in the industrialized countries. Chinese symbols, for whatever reason, are still considered just not worth as much and not as sophisticated. So I kind of snatch them up because I think they're wonderful. And they're also equally unique and contain as much quality control and curious sounds that you can find. But now all of those countries listen to music with drum set as the basis of all of their commercial music. So that's the kind of, isn't that kind of a funny thing, that you have these non-Chinese tom-toms on the drum set of or even just electronic sound of them in the music that's then exported back from the center to the peripheries and then manufactured there on its own, of course, too. So, yeah.
What are they getting the bronze from? From any place or from a specific place?
Copper and tin, maybe.
Tin only comes from Afghanistan, and the copper comes from everywhere. That's the discovery of tin in Afghanistan is what caused us to go from the Iron Age to the Bronze Age, and it also created the entire ancient civilization where everybody had to get along. It's Urbana bronze, so they couldn't have wars with each other. They couldn't argue over borders and stuff like that. So they had an area of peace during the Bronze era, relatively. I mean, they had skirmishes and stuff, but pretty much everybody got along because they had to have that tin move from Afghanistan to all the different places that went bronze. And then somebody figured out how to make iron. And once they figured out how to make iron out of which required higher smelting temperatures, then that whole piece fell apart. Because then people said, hey, I don't need tin anymore. I don't have to depend on any of these guys. I'm going to make these iron weapons or these from stone to bronze, and then stone to copper, copper to bronze, bronze to iron, and then I'm going to make war chariots, and I'm going to take over, and then so the Bronze Age ended with like total chaos, and then went into this kind of more authoritarian Iron Age, where you have these empires, more powerful empires, and things were more unbalanced.
So the original surgeons in Turkey were making their symbols from materials brought from Afghanistan?
The tin had to come from Afghanistan. As far as I know, I think that, although, maybe back then that was the only place it came from, maybe there's probably tin deposits in other places now, but they found. But that was like where the first tin mines were, at least.
I suppose if you were a damn alchemist, you probably knew how to get some metals. Yeah, awesome. Let's listen to some symbols. So, I love this symbol. One of the things that would be interesting to me is to play two symbols that are kind of close to each other. I probably shouldn't have two symbols that are almost identical. This is one of the main types of symbols you got from the U.S. Siljan factory in 1930, that era. Choke symbol, I called it a second ago. You can crash it with your finger, meaning it'll open all the way up and give you all the sound that it can give with your finger. Pretty amazing, right? So that's the thing that I find kind of fantastic about these. Like I barely touch it. and there's the whole thing. You're not going to get a whole lot more sound by sticking it on a stand and going. You get a little bit of that, peak in the initial hit of the timbre.
I'm associating that in my mind with the consonant K. After the whole name is
Another one almost the same type. Here, there's a difference. So this is a little bit just to demonstrate. Okay, same kind of. I can't get it to open up quite as much, but these are almost the same weight, from the same time, from the same factory, the same stamp is on them. They were signed by the person who made them back then, so you see underneath the bell. There's a little bit of a tone difference.
That one's got a real like a picture.
So when people would get their cymbals, would they check out different ones and out of it?
Yeah.
They were supposed to pick the one they like?
Yeah, you could sit, I mean, it's the same as today. If there was a person, a dealer or something that had like a ton of these, stick them on a drum set, you sit down and, try playing something or other and, see if you like it. Maybe I like the other one better. This one. I mean, the other thing about it is when you lay the cymbal this thin, this is called paper thin, so one of the dimensions in which cymbals are described is their thickness. Paper thin ones don't come out perfectly flat in the old days. You can see there's a wall, a little bit of a
curvature.
Yeah. Well, it's because one of the things that happens with bronze is that you heat it and you cool it and heat it in different ways in order to temper the metal. And the lathing, which is the final scraping off of the metal after it's been hammered, would heat it up so much that it would start to change the shape of the metal. But I think it's just wonderful. This thing for $15, if someone didn't know it was worth it, they had tape all over it.
Is there a correlation between how hard you hit it and how long the decay is, or is that not perfect?
It's sometimes surprising, kind of like with a brush, where if you push hard, you don't get as much paint on the canvas. There is sometimes that feeling of like, you get a little bit, a slightly lighter thing to last longer. But that's also because one of the things that happens within the hole, this ends up muting it. So if it's actually allowed to kind of not have a lot of friction with this, versus if you hit hard and it hits the stem and then hits the stem and then hits the stem, it might mute it a little.
But doesn't it interfere with itself too if you hit it hard enough? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's a hypothesis. The other one, when you hit it, I really felt like it had a kind of canceled itself out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that's what ended up getting called the splash. So, where we've got cymbals that are less than 12 inches in diameter are often called a splash cymbal. Whereas something around 16 inches, it's called a crash. It's slightly longer. You get that nice satisfactory accent that'll really cover over a transition in a song, for instance, that it's used for. Whereas a splash is a much smaller thing. You're just kind of like, it kind of lets you get right to the, about a quarter note later, you're not listening to that thing.
Okay, so here's the thought. I'm saying this depends on the type of composition you are dealing with. If this is the type of music, the genre, so to speak, that also what he said, right? Distances. It depends what distances you compose. If you took this mallet on the floor and you played the tremolo on, right, two of them, and did the tremolo on this, it's a different type of. You want to do it in this kind of music, but you can do it as a, in another composition.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know what it means to cancel it out, because maybe you want to get that specific sound where it doesn't really reverberate, but to get something else, you bring it to another level.
Well, it's kind of the paradox of percussion is the instrument that doesn't really sustain by dint of its action. By doing this, you hardly ever can conceive of yourself making something sustain. That's why you get into rolling in order to create a sustained type effect. But yeah, you could.
Does it cancel itself out now or no?
Well, I guess it's a
I just want to understand what you meant.
It's a little off topic. I'm actually talking about the other little splash symbol that small decay after that as well, but I have that feeling that initial drop off is the cymbal just not coming to terms with the fact that all these things want to resonate in there and they just kind of collide with each other and the whole thing drops off fast.
Interesting where I was saying it a little louder.
Yeah.
And I get that same.
Nice.
Exact same application.
Like it can't handle it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Interesting. So anyway, people used to use these mallets more probably than today with the drum set, but you can always hit your stands. You usually hear the fundamental a little better for you. It's a very different type of crash than you would use with a drum set application, but let's see. Still kind of introducing stuff. So there's this hi-hat bit. That's another probably good thing. Just again, giving you like the stuff I've been researching, not so much pushed through the agenda of that paper, but for the purpose of listening to things. So the hi-hat, first there's this thing called the Charleston Snowshoe, I think is what it was called. So same problem. Let's just have one percussionist. Okay, let's get that bass drum on the ground. Could we get the other foot to be doing something where a couple of the cymbals would come together? And so they made this screwed up thing where there's a couple pieces of wood with cymbals on the inside of them and a little spring in between, and you would clap the thing together by hitting your foot on it. And the cymbals were on the ground in this case, and they're probably about 7 inches big, and they're sometimes even made out of like brass or some cheap metal or something. And it's just kind of a clapping sound. And there's all kinds of mythology about whose idea was it to make it taller. A lot of people give credit to the Zildjians or to Chickweb or to Krupa or one person or another, and it doesn't matter. The point is, at some point there was this evolution, and literally a few years later there would be a cymbal pair here with a little spring done to the top of the foot, and that was called a low boy, and there were still small little things, 9-inch cymbals, 10-inch cymbals, with big bells right here. And then someone had the idea, let's just put another arm of steel in between and make a high boy, and it became called a hi-hat. I don't know why you call it a hat, but snowshoe wasn't really named either. It's all kind of ridiculous. But so that gives you the alternative of playing it with the sticks, as well as the clap function, which is the more traditional function of cymbals. Clapping two cymbals together, and usually a lot more dynamics. You can do this kind of action with handheld cymbals that you can't really do with a hi-hat. But there's a lot of stuff you do with this that you can't do with some of that, because now I've got my other limbs free to do things too, and I've got this all within proximity, so I can play beats that incorporate them all. Like... And so that's really exciting, because that's a sound you never would be able to get if you had this. It would be really hard to syncopate that between several players, and also it comes through in all these different ways that, you know, your arm placement gives you the ability to do this thing, but then there are other things that are made impossible. So it's like any kind of political system. There's the degrees of freedom that you get, and then there's the constraints that are put upon the action that you can do. Because I can't just suddenly reach this over here. So there are other things that maybe, I don't know, in some other configuration.
Well, you can't play everything at once.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously a drummer can just go, okay, well for this song I'm going to put this over here. I mean, this is the kind of play that's afforded by having a kind of, you know, hybrid instrument like this. But what drummers start doing is developing things specifically for this configuration, largely after Gene Krupa sets it up that a small tom goes here, a low tom goes here, maybe a second one here, 2 crash scissors, cymbals up here, maybe a splash here or here. And again, the China cymbal disappears from the more wars for voice. But you can see it if I'm playing something like that. You see that? Like I can't, unless I start with. So the hand that I start with might have to change in certain points, or the drum set itself might have to be reconfigured. But this was kind of the homeostasis that was arrived at because, well, amongst other things, I think people like going from high to low on their toms, and like the accessibility of a ride cymbal, right, where this hand
naturally playing. And then beyond that, there's a lot of variation, but hardly anyone varies from this configuration right here. If you're right-handed, you put the bass drum on your right foot. If you're left-handed, you put it here. So there's those kind of like central rules really arrives at, it seems, because of ease of playing and it's the quantity of freedom, the quantity of alternatives that will open up if it was configured in that way.
Rob, have you heard how the Chinese cymbal is played in Chinese music?
All different. I mean, there's lots of, well, China's got a lot of, if one were to really study Chinese music, then there's like hundreds of types of cymbals. There's bell trees, and there's things that rest on strings, and there's gongs, which are a cymbal technically, and this is, I'm just talking about the American drums.
Are Chinese style cymbals that are exported to us also used in Chinese music, or is that kind of something that they've kind of developed a separate market and it's kind of evolved in some way?
Well, all I'm really talking about, I don't know. I mean, all I really know is that if I listen to popular music globally, the global category, there's that beat of the drum set. So this isn't really, I'm not really doing ethnography of any particular country in this. And I can't really speak to the wider variety of what bronze is used for in Turkey or anything like that. I can say that I've looked at the factories where the cymbals are made in China to the extent that there's any literature at all available about them, and they don't only make cymbals. So like the cymbal is just kind of like one of the things that they are making out of there. They're making leather weights and tools and any number of things. Munitions. And all those companies are largely lost. It's almost all done out of Wuhan now, province, central China. And this is probably from the 70s. This is when they started re-exporting to the U.S. One of the things that's interesting, you can see if you look at it against the light, is that in the Chinese system you have a cymbal master that takes the cymbal at the end of the process and re-hammers it. So all these are kind of lathed at the end, they scrape off that. Oh, so here's unlathed bronze. And you can see, so it's really quite a dirty, ugly looking thing from the burning of the metal while they're making it. And then at the end they put it on a lathe, it spins, and they've got a scraping tool that scrapes off all that exterior layer. The Chinese cymbal is oftentimes hard to get into that more rectangular bell, so it's left unlathed. But almost all of these, it's kind of like a craft shop. The thing hopefully has been hammered right, because when you're done lathing it, it's done. If you don't like the way it sounds, there's no more work that's going to be done to it anyway. You just try to sell it.
Do they tune it and just hammer while lathing, or is that just kind of?
That's not shared with Western reporters.
Okay.
So there's not a whole lot of people asking either, so it could very well be. I know it's again, it's like a kind of a family thing. In fact, I had Carol Wong in town help translate the Chinese on some of the old cymbals for the cymbal project, and they almost all refer to families. So there's a set of families. The Wang family seemed to be really big in Shanghai, and they were apparently located in the Eastern Gate and selling cymbals. When the Wuhan factory was kind of reported on by the magazine called Modern Drummer in 1980, a similar thing was found, which was like this cousin knew about how to tune the cymbals, this guy over here was the oldest one, and he was tired of working and told, and then there's like this new person who's going to be primed to be the next person, and they have to check every single one before it's exported, and they finally put their stamp on it or whatever and mail it out. Recently, this company has figured out that these things are never going to be sold for much to European and American markets, which is still where a lot of the hard currency of our economy is kept. So they started making cymbals that look like this. They've got two brand names, Dream and Bliss, and they are wonderful sounding cymbals because they're using this kind of method of hammering a single blob of bronze into a sheet, tuning it, and then lathing it in the Turkish bell configuration with a bridge that kind of staggers. And they're one of a kind, they're awesome sounding, and they're a little bit cheaper than the ones that you find from companies like the Zildjian coming down in the US. This is probably my favorite cymbal lately. And this is a shame. You can see, oh, so check that out. In here you can see they actually tried lathing inside of the bell. So you can see the little lathe circles inside of there. So while the thing was spinning on the lathe, someone got something in there and was kind of trying to get off some of that unlathed bronze. So yeah, this is the, this stamp here is our only indication for anything. And it refers to the Wenju company. Anyway, I love this symbol. It's awesome. It's got a hole that's way too small to fit on those cymbal stands, so you have to take it up. Let's see what's on there. And it gives that kind of stuff. It gives you both a little bit of the gong, a little bit of the bell, the quick decay, but a little bit intermediate decay. It gives that sizzle sound. You get really different sounds on different parts of it.
It's only from one side. Yeah. The right side is even more.
Oh, here's that. This side here. Today, right, you can be playing this way. They all have, I only had handmade some, this is why it's kind of a shame. The company in America, the A's Ocean Factory, as it's called, got into making their hammering patterns really regular. So I don't know if you can see against the light how sort of symmetrical looking the hammering pattern is in that. This is still in the 30s. This is the one I refer to as more bell-like. It's for like the mid-30s. It's like they were trying to get a little bit bigger because the jazz bands were getting bigger. And there were so many saxophones to compete with or whatever. They had to be a little louder. And so they got into these really regular patterns. In the 50s, it becomes machine-driven. So that's why I say, oh man, if we could have some contemporaries, I don't know what anymore. Because they all sound the same. I mean, that's the thing. that this is a big dialectic with this. We don't make cymbals that are one of a kind anymore. We make cymbals that almost all sound the same. You want to sound like the right cymbal that's in the music you're hearing, so you have to have these standards.
I wonder if on that point, that explains a couple of drummers that I've heard that interest me a lot, who choose broken cymbals in order to get maybe difference of sound.
Do you mean those ones with the holes in them?
No, actually fucked up cymbals
Yeah.
that were discards by the companies that they deal with. Like Chris Gaddy Dave is one, and the drummer for this band that came here is from Chicago named Sheer Accident.
Sheer Accident. He makes his own.
Oh, okay.
He was playing with one of his that broke while he was making it.
There's been a recent flourish of interest in cymbals, and I think one, there's some kind of machismo thing going on with it, and there's kind of a commodity fetishism thing on it. But the other is it's greatly increased the range of stuff you find out there with cymbals, just in the past decade. I also think the internet had a lot to do with it, access to this information. There's several people online who, if you get a crack in your cymbal, like that one has a little crack on the edge of it somewhere. It's like only maybe a half inch or an inch or so, and it's a shame because that will grow over time and destroy the cymbal if I really play it hard. But there are people online that just have bronze cutting tools and will just cut that little spot out of it for you. But a lot of people have, of course, taken that and thought, oh, well, there's a little creative project unto its own. But if we turn it into the shape of, a silhouette or something, now that's my cymbal. Or, but if we have cymbals that are completely lopsided, it looks like a flat triangle hanging off of a little stand plate. The ones with holes in them, I think, are produced by Mine, which is a German cymbal company. They actually, their whole brand of cymbals is almost defined by the fact they have big holes in them, which give different kind of, what we call more trashy kind of effects sound like a cymbal. Well, it's almost 5:30. I mean, I didn't play that much.
Or we can play something there.
Well, any directions for the discussion about the ear play? Curiosities about these cymbals?
There are eight rivets in here. Are there standard numbers of rivets?
So there's a whole direction of cymbals like that got lost, called the swish knocker. You can Google that. It's a weird. So Chinese cymbals, like a lot of people try to keep around with this design of those. And the biggest one would be 22 inches. So this is 18. We've got a picture of a cymbal that big. It would have that same kind of design of having that flipped up edge. And they would have 20 or 40 cymbals installed in them, those little rivets would be put all around it. And that was used as a ride cymbal even into the 50s with the big band first and stuff. But there are sometimes you see someone just stick them on in there, because they just want a little bit of that sound, and they hope the cymbals a little flat or something.
And there's also the option of taking a thin, like a necklace chain or whatever, hanging it across the middle and let it dangle across the cymbal and let that be the symbol.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone ever has a stupid pearl necklaces at home or something, will throw them on there, because it creates that kind of thing. The thing about that is that it also does, it can dampen it a little bit, so you get interesting kind of interplays. And that's the kind of stuff when you're playing around with your drum kit, you get into this configuration, that configuration. This thing I want to get rid of. I can't figure out anything to do with these giant. I mean, for the amount of sound you get, it's okay, great, but like. The crash isn't even a crash. It's like.
I'm curious what it sounds like a jam with the 13 jam sound.
Jam with the 13.
Oh, yeah.
She was.
Yeah, simple.
Well, I thought if we all, if many of us, we could give you extra cymbal sounds with our fingers. Oh, not access to all of them. That's not, I'm a little worried with these things. They're kind of, it's been a multiple year project, but I mean, you guys can't see this, but I could take this and go. They're, I think this weighs 190 grams. But yeah, that would be fun workshop type thing. We just have, get 20 stands and actually just sit there. And that's kind of what I thought. I didn't really know this was going to be. Myself. Maybe we sit there and be like, the other problem is we play 3 at once, you get a very different sound. I mean, that's the whole art of playing that is, you get into. They all overlap and you can't piece them back apart.
But they overlap because you play the same. If you work to do a different part, you can distinguish. In advance, what kind of music.
Yeah, that's everything.
As Gene would do.
As
Gene Cooper.
Get that trombone in there. You play 13 in trombone? I can try. 13 equal divisions of the octave.
Yeah, that's the part you missed.
It's also saying,
This, the timbre, is sort of at the harmonics there, so it's adjusted. 13 equal.
Is it attack sensitive or keyboard?
What did you say, Rob?
I didn't say anything about like so these Chinese toms. Like the reason these went out of use is if we would raise the humidity in here like 10%, these would sound like playing shoe leather. Right? And so luckily it's dry today. They've got a little bit of you can hear the tone of the drum heads, but they're completely sensitive to humidity. So that was the mechanism by which we got into key-tuned drum heads, where you can tighten the head, and the head's made out of plastic, it's made out of mylar, and hardly anyone messes with these leather heads anymore, because they change with the weather and the temperature. I don't improvise.
Well, I wonder if it makes sense to close the session and then let people who need to leave quietly do that.
Thanks for listening. Open for discussion for a little bit.
Thanks for your time.